Welcome to the latest in a series of development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. This webinar, Courageous Conversations, is delivered in collaboration between the NIHR Academy and Oakridge, one of our leadership development programme partners. This webinar will be facilitated by Mark Blanchard, a senior consultant at Oakridge who has extensive experience in behavioural and cultural change and is passionate about helping people and teams to achieve their full potential. Mark, I'll now hand over to you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Holly. And hopefully everyone should see my slides now. Great stuff. So thanks, Holly, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Courageous Conversations webinar this afternoon. Just in terms of getting the most out of the webinar today, you're all on mute. If you've got any questions, then you saw on the holding slide about putting questions in the Q&A panel. We'll have some polls as we go through just to keep interaction and just get your thoughts on some of the areas that we'll touch on today. Have a pen and paper handy. Might be some areas which you want to note down and actually try out. And as Holly said, we're being recorded today. So if you miss anything, then check out the recording afterwards. If you know somebody who couldn't make it today, then point them to the recording there. And I'll be referencing some theories, some articles, a couple of TED Talks. So those references will be in the deck as well. So without further ado, let's go. So the focus today, really, so three things. The first thing is to explore a little bit about why we find certain conversations challenging or difficult. So we have lots of conversations with lots of different people. Some of them are easy and some of them are harder. So just exploring, why do we see some conversations as challenging? Explore how we can get more comfortable with conflict, and share some tips and tools, techniques, and a framework to help you give great feedback. Quite often, the difficult conversations that we kind of dread are the ones about giving people feedback. So we're going to focus in on the framework in the latter part of the webinar today. Okay. We often avoid challenging or difficult conversations because we're not comfortable with confrontation. I personally, I don't like confrontation. I find that quite challenging. The reasons for that is that we may not want to upset the other person or make them feel bad. We're not sure how they're going to react. We may give some feedback and we get a reaction or an attack. So we're not sure how they're going to react to that feedback. And we don't want to make the situation worse. If we are not confident about approaching those conversations in a skillful way, we don't want to make the situation worse. So do we just live with what we have? The word conflict itself is quite a strong word and often evokes negative feelings. So think about the way conflict is portrayed in the media. Have a look at these pictures. Which ones of those kind of convey conflict to you? Which ones resonate when you say conflict? And if I reflect on those photographs there, is that the typical conflict ones are the middle, the person with the boxing gloves. We've got two birds in the top right seem to be having a bit of a conflict, but the rest of those are actually conflict situations. We enjoy playing sports, and if you play a team sport, that is a conflict, but actually we get a lot of enjoyment out of it. The two people at the top and the middle on the right hand side, that's a conflict. That could be a sharing of ideas and a really healthy debate, which is the bottom right picture. But quite often we have in our mind that conflict actually is bad, and actually conflict is hugely important. So we might instinctively view it as negative. Especially in the work environment, it's important that we're able to have robust debates where people are encouraged to share their views openly and their opinions, because that's the way that the best solutions are developed. So it might be you've got a complex problem, and actually a really healthy conflict ends up developing and creating a great solution for that problem. You could be addressing a really important issue, and it's important to get other people's perspectives on that issue. It may be there's an opportunity that can be realized, and conflict is a way of finding a way to realize the opportunity. From a research project perspective, is that you're managing conflict all the time in order to agree the best way forward for that research project. And it may be around an individual performance or a development conversation. Professor Margaret Heffernan has done a TED talk, and the link will be in the back of the deck, called Dare to Disagree, where she describes that while most people instinctively avoid conflict, good disagreement is central to progress. And she illustrates how great research teams, relationships, and organizations actively encourage people to deeply disagree and have a robust and healthy debate. And Brené Brown, author of Dare to Lead, she talks about getting into a rumble. She defines this as, let's have a real conversation, even if it's tough. She says that courage and fear are not mutually exclusive, and that most of us feel brave and afraid at the same time. So think back to the situations where you actually feel brave and fearful at the same time. And that's because that situation matters, it means something. And hence why we've called this webinar Courageous Conversations. So having difficult conversations that feel like a rumble is uncomfortable, and we may fear them. So we need courage, openness, honesty, and curiosity to have them confidently. There are also some good other reasons we should have good conflict and courageous conversations and get comfortable with those. So whether it's in a one-to-one situation or a team, then we can develop insights through accessing other people's views and looking at different ways of working and getting those. And being able to offer and ask for support and being open to say, I need some help. Provide learning opportunities for us all and help us and others improve and grow. And if it's done skillfully with empathy, compassion, and positive intent, then that really helps build trust in our working relationships. So let's have a poll. So the first poll is, I'm going to launch that. Why do we avoid difficult situations? So tick all that agree. Bear with me. So tick all that agree. So it may be from your past experience or what you're aware of, but why do you and from your knowledge, why do people avoid difficult conversations? Oops. There we go. The poll is now open. Hopefully you can see that. Yep, we've got the votes are coming in. Oh, excellent. Great. Almost there.
Here's Almost There by Annika Noni Rose on Amazon Music.
And 86. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's end the polling. Share the results. Okay. So quite high feeling of defensiveness, bad experiences. They kind of taint our confidence really of having those difficult conversations. And the top one there, 80% are feeling vulnerable and a fear. That's great. Thank you very much for that. Okay. So despite there being huge benefits of having a good open disagreement and debate at work, we still avoid them. And the poll shows that actually there's quite a broad spread of the reasons for not having these, tackling these difficult conversations. Let's take a look at what might be going on in the brain, because it's important to raise self-awareness before we actually tackle a conversation live, is actually understand what's going on with us and why we find things difficult. As humans, we've got millennia of programming, and that programming is for us to seek out safety when we're faced with danger. So you'll be familiar with the fight, flight, and freeze response we have to react to dangerous situations. This is a really important reaction. It floods our bodies with that adrenaline, and the cortisol enables us to respond quickly. Now, millennia ago, that avoided us being eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. And more recently, this is the reaction that avoids us being run over by the rogue cyclist on the footpath. However, when you kind of bring that emotional, that reactionary response to danger into the workplace, it can cause confrontational behavior, defensive, can cause you to withdraw from a particular situation because you actually perceive it as being a danger situation. Now, in the long term, that's not overly useful for us. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Without trust in our working relationships, what we tend to find is that, like, a simple phrase of, and I don't know whether folks on the webinar, this kind of resonates with you, but if somebody says to me, oh, could I give you some feedback? My immediate reaction is, uh-oh, what have I done wrong? So I've got an immediate defensive, oh, what have I done wrong that somebody wants to give me some feedback? My kind of negative bias is always, there's something wrong, rather than, oh, someone's going to give me some great feedback. So just reflect on how would you immediately react to someone saying that to you, because that's kind of what's going on in your head. Now, psychologist David Rock, back in 2008, developed what he called the SCARF model. And this is really to help us understand why we may react as we do to certain events. Why do we move away from things that we see as a threat to us and towards things that we see as a reward? And he defined these 5 domains that trigger our threat and reward circuitry in our brains. So you can see from the graphic, the circle in the middle, that this denotes the 5 domains which he identified. So one of the domains is status. So if we feel that our status is being threatened, then we tend to move away and we see that as a threat response. If we see the situation is actually enhancing our status, then that moves us towards a reward response. So if you are perceiving that feedback is going to negatively impact your status amongst your peers and on your project, i.e. you're not performing as well as everybody else, you could see that as producing that threat response, and hence you react in the way you do, and you react to move away from it rather than towards it. The second domain is certainty, and you know, generally people don't like ambiguity and uncertainty, so creating of like a lack of clarity on the situation actually could create a threat response. Creating clarity on the flip side could trigger a reward response, which improves performance. So if you want increased performance from a team or from an individual, creating clarity around roles, responsibility and expectations is really motivating. Autonomy is A, and if we feel in control of our lives and our work, and we feel we have autonomy in delivering what's expected of us, that can be a reward response. But if we feel that the control is being taken away from us, so that feedback and that difficult conversation because we feel we're losing control, that could be seen as a threat. Relatedness, we may be avoiding a conversation because we fear that it may impact the relationship we have with the other person. So if we feel that may be at risk, that could trigger that threat response. And finally, if we don't feel that we're being treated fairly, that tends to increase the stress levels and create a threat response. So by thinking about what the potential threat may be, so thinking about that conversation that you need to have, what may the other person, what may be their triggers for a threat response, according to the 5 dimensions, is a useful way of thinking, how is your message going to come across, and help you plan for that conversation. And if you can communicate and message the feedback or what you need to get out of that conversation in a way that pushes the person more towards a reward response and away from a threat response, then you're more likely to get the outcome that you're looking for. So the SCARF model helps us understand why we might be reacting as we do, what we feel is at risk for us in that particular situation. Now here's the ladder of inference model developed by Harvard professor Chris Argyris back in 1990. And we can use this to gain additional insights. So this is all about getting additional insights into why we see the things as we do. So we've been triggered by something that we feel we need to have a difficult conversation. The ladder of inference helps us kind of analyze why we are feeling how we do. So the ladder of inference, at the bottom of the ladder, we have the observable data, the thing that's happened, the scenario, the event. I select information from that, and I'm selecting information that's important to me. I'm adding meaning to that information. I'm drawing out conclusions, and I then take an action. And each rung of that ladder is influenced by my beliefs, assumptions, attitudes, and values. And these are formed throughout my life. So everyone carries around their own ladder. So I've got a ladder, and everyone's got a ladder, and everyone on the call today's got a ladder. And this kind of explains why you can show exactly the same data to a number of different people, and actually everybody may come up with a different action because of how we filter the information that we see to fit with our beliefs, assumptions, and values. So remember that your SCARF dimensions are also included within these as well. So if you see some observable data that has some impact on your status, you may then start to cloud and filter and develop up your action plan based on how you're going to react to how you've interpreted that. So a personal example for myself is I sent a colleague an email marked urgent, and this was a couple of weeks ago. I've not heard anything from that person. They still haven't responded. So that's the observable data I have is I haven't had a response to my email, which I sent a couple of weeks ago. I'm selecting from that is that person hasn't responded to me. The meaning I'm starting to add to it is that they've ignored my email. They've ignored it. To me, this means that to them, I'm not important, even though I put a little exclamation mark on the email and I said it was urgent. That means they don't think I'm important. So the action I'm going to take is that when I meet them next week in this meeting, I'm going to give them the peace of my mind of them ignoring me and they're devaluing my input to the whole project. Another example, which will be in the deck, is so we have if you're setting a meeting, you're leading a meeting, and one of the members, David, is kind of looking at his phone all the way through the meeting, which is really distracting for you. The meaning you've added to that is that David doesn't feel that this is an important meeting, and if they're not contributing and they're distracted, then they don't care about the meeting, which means they don't care about the project. So the assumption is they don't care about the project. So what my assumption is that they shouldn't be at the meeting, so they shouldn't be at future meetings. Only people who contribute should be at future meetings. And the action I may take from that is I'm not going to invite David. Now, what we end up is that the ladder of inference can help us analyze why we're thinking what we're thinking, but really it's a story that we're creating. That story may or may not be true. There's a high likelihood in both of my situations. So in this situation here, upon following up with David, you found out that actually David's waiting for the hospital to phone them back because a relative has had to go in, they've been sick. So he's a bit distracted by that, but you're not aware of that information. So you created a story that David's not engaged. And the fact that the reality is a lot completely different. For my particular example is that following up on this, I may find that it's the fact that for some reason my email went into their spam folder and they've not checked it. So they've never even received the email from me, and they're mortified that they haven't got back to me and they're really apologetic. So we all create stories based on the observable data, which may or may not be true. And the courageous conversations is a way of structuring that conversation to be able to share why you're feeling what you're feeling in a way that the other person gets insights into where you are, and they're allowed to share their view of the particular situation, and you come to some agreeable outcome from that. You can push that forwards. So SCARF and the ladder of inference help us to become more self-aware of ourselves and others and inform our preparation for the conversation. So in terms of approach for the conversation itself, so there's like an operational piece of we've got to have the conversation. It can also be useful to reflect on our default approach to conflict, as this may also be impacting our ability to get comfortable with it and get a good outcome. So a model I want to share here is the ThomasKilmann conflict model, which you may have come across. And that identifies 5 different approaches based on the degree of assertiveness and cooperation that we're using within that conversation. The model can help us work out our own preference, the preference of the other person. So based on knowing how the other person operates and the relationship you have with them, what's their preferred style. And it might be that we need to adapt our style in order to get the outcome that we need to get from it. So the 5 styles briefly are: we avoid, so we completely withdraw, we don't have the conflict, we avoid it completely. Competing, this is where we really stand our ground, we dig our heels in, we're really assertively showing our position, we're sticking to it. Compromising, this is where for both parties you're kind of giving away, you're not really achieving what you're aiming to achieve, you're compromising on both sides in order to push the situation forwards. Accommodating, where we give in completely and adopt the other person's position, so we accommodate them fully. And collaborating, where we work together to agree an outcome that meets both parties' requirements. So the second poll we want to just run is, think of if you've had a last difficult conversation or a last conflict type discussion, which style did you use predominantly? What's your kind of your preferred style? I'm just going to open the poll now. And there we go, the poll's open. That's great. Okay, about 70%. 86. Okay, and we'll close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's share those results. Oh, that's brilliant. So we have a compromising, collaborating, very low on competing from the group on the call today. So high 31% collaborating, accommodating, and compromising. So the important thing here is it's not whether that style is right or wrong. It's the fact that if you reflect on, oops, I've gone out of, if you reflect on that style, then if you've used that style, did you actually get a good outcome? Did you get what you expected? If you did, then fantastic. If you didn't, then the question would be is how do you actually flex that style? It's important that each style has a positive use in particular circumstances. And actually within the same conversation, you could flip between all different styles depending on how that discussion's going. So the important thing is awareness of your preferred style and how it might be helping or hindering you getting the outcome. So there's just some examples of some situations. So for an accommodating style to be used when you care less about the issue, it's less an important issue. Whether it's just it's more important to keep the peace or you feel you've got no choice. The avoiding style is where the conflict may seem more trivial. Maybe you need to take a time out to think. So what you're avoiding because you need to plan it a bit better, or you've got no chance for a good outcome there if you avoid it. Now, avoiding and accommodating can often be used as a tactical action. So you're thinking about the longer game and the bigger picture, and actually accommodating, avoiding may get you just the progress or the time out that you need in terms of the overall strategy of the addressing the situation. Compromising might be where there's a tight deadline and it's more important to achieve a solution than probably the best one, so you may compromise. Collaborating, where it's really important to gain multiple perspectives, so this is it's a really important issue, the relationship's important. And competing is you need to stand up for your rights. You need to make a quick decision, you have decision-making rights. You need to end a long-term conflict, you need to put an end to it, and you may use a competing stance. So if we look across the different styles, then avoiding and accommodating are similar to a lose-win kind of situation. Compromising tends to be a lose-lose. Collaborating is an example of a win-win, and a competing is a win-lose. And as I said before, is they all have a place. There's no wrong style, but there's a wrong application of the style in the wrong context. So it's all about the context of the situation. So quite often we see that a conversation is difficult because we need to give someone some feedback. How many times, I've said at the opening, how many times do we have a difficult conversation when it's good feedback? It's not a difficult conversation, but feedback conversations tend to be the more difficult ones, that you've experienced something and you need to give somebody some feedback. As PwC saw in 2016 from some research they did, is almost 2/3 of employees want feedback. Important thing here is that they want clear and effective feedback. So what we want to share with you today is a framework to help you give clear and effective feedback, and to give you the confidence to be able to have those and not be afraid of them. If you think about it from a personal perspective, then without effective feedback, how would you know that you're meeting the expectations of others? How would you know what you need to keep doing because you're doing it really well? Do more of, stop doing, start doing, or do differently. Without feedback, it's very difficult to do that. Something that can stop us getting in the way of this is to be able to have those conversations without the emotion overriding everything and ruling the way. And so a simple framework can really help us. So here's a framework. So this is called the often model. So what you're doing is using this model. Remember the ladder of inference, which I shared previously. The often model helps us validate or disprove what's going on ahead. So it's a vehicle for us testing out this story that we've created with the other person. So the often model starts with the observation. What I observed you do, what observed you do was, this made me feel. What I'm assuming is, from that feeling, makes me assume this. The impact on me is, so the effect, and then the needs is what I'd like is. So a personal example of this might be from, so my example would be, you asked for my comments and concerns about the proposal, which I provided immediately, and it's now been 3 days and you've not even acknowledged it. So that's what I've observed. That's the data. So remember the ladder of inference, the data at the bottom of the ladder? That's the data. So feeling, I'm feeling angry and frustrated that I responded really quickly, and you've not even had the courtesy to acknowledge my response. So that's the impact, that's the feeling it's had on me. This makes me think that you didn't really want my input, as I've been quite vocal about and concerned about the direction of the project. And I get that feeling that you're just asking for comments to tick a box to say you've engaged everyone and consulted everybody. The effect on me is that I'm now thinking that my skills and my experience maybe aren't a fit for this project, and I'm seriously considering leaving and finding a new role where there's a better fit. The key thing is this ends with what I need is. So what I need is clarity from you about your expectations of me. Am I meeting your expectations? And I'd love an honest opinion of whether you see me adding value or not, as prolonging this situation won't do either of us any good. So this is kind of a ladder of inference applied to that situation. So this just gives a framework. Now, remember the key point on here is it's focused on behaviors and not on the person. It's not personal. And it's about what I've observed and being really open with what impact that is having on me. And it gives the other person the information for them to become aware of something they may not be aware of. I've created a story because I've got a ladder of inference, and the often model is a good framework to be able to articulate that story. So let's have a look at another situation. So in this short video, Jerry is a junior researcher and he's not happy about something. He needs to give some feedback to his project leader, Anita. So let's have a look at this first video.
Oh, hi, Anita.
Oh, hi, Jerry. Are you okay?
Hi.
What can I do for you?
Yeah, I just wanted a minute, if that's okay. You all right just now?
Yeah, a bit pressed, but come on, that's fine.
Well, okay. Well, Anita, I'm feeling a bit concerned, really, about the project. I'm wondering if I should step back from this project, actually, because I'm feeling a bit demotivated. I don't feel that I get listened to. I don't feel that my input is valued. So I'm kind of just think maybe I'd be better off working with someone else.
Oh, Jerry, I don't agree with that. As you know, the project's really behind schedule and we're really trying to get things back on track. I just need all hands on deck, and at the moment, you know, I need you. Are you on board or not?
Well, of course I'm on board, but I don't feel that you listen to me.
Oh no, Jerry, I'm definitely listening to you. You know, I think you're doing really well, and I know the people in the team think that you're doing great. They speak really highly of you.
Right. Okay. Well. Okay. Good. Well, we'll keep going.
Okay.
So from that first effort from Jerry, some observations as we reflect on that is that his opening was, I don't want to bother you. That's quite, you know, subservient. I don't want to bother you. Have you got a minute? And it doesn't come across as very assertive. A tendency maybe to come across a bit of whiny, whinging, complaining in terms of that body language. How he's kind of hunched down. He feels a bit uncomfortable about having the conversation. Imagine from Anita's perspective how that would come across, especially as she seems to be really busy. Did he really clearly identify Anita's behaviour? So from the often model, the observation, did he clearly pull out Anita's behaviour? How does she know that her behaviour is the problem that he's got? No sharing of that evidence. Anita's almost having to work it out for herself as to what the issue is. And it ends without any commitment. And does Jerry sound convincing that he's got the outcome that he wants to get? And if we reflect on that, if this is Jerry giving effective feedback to Anita and hoping to improve the situation, do we expect the situation to be resolved, or do you think there's going to be a problem going forwards because it's not really been highlighted of what Jerry needs from Anita? So that was take one. Jerry's now got the benefits of owning a time travel machine, and he's had a look at that video, and he's had a look at the often model, and he's just reflecting on a few things, and he's going to have another go now. So let's just have a look at the next try.
Well, hi Anita.
Hi, Jerry.
Hi. Are you all right for a couple of minutes? There's something I feel we need to talk about.
Yeah, okay, go on.
Yeah, I suppose it's important for me, Anita, because I'm feeling a bit demotivated after the meeting on Wednesday.
Oh.
Well, what happened, Anita, was during the meeting, I felt that I wasn't being listened to and that my opinions weren't valued by you. So I'll give you an example, but when I was putting forward the idea of how we could take it forward, you first of all, you said, well, that'll never work. And then you just moved the conversation forward, looking for other ideas in the room. And it left me feeling quite demotivated and a bit worried that maybe I'm not doing a good job for you. So I wanted to just flush that one out with you.
Oh, Jerry, I really wasn't aware that you were feeling like this, and I am really sorry if my actions have made you feel that way. As you might remember, there was just so much going on with that meeting. I had the steering committee following that, and I just wanted to give them some really positive news. So, you know, I really, you know, that wasn't my intention at all. I was just trying to get on with things.
Okay, and I appreciate it's not your intent, but it felt difficult for me, so I wanted to raise it. I mean, certainly, Anita, with the thing about feeding back to the steering committee, more than happy that you use us to think about that. Yeah, because it is an important project, so quite happy to try and contribute into that as well.
Thank you, Jerry. It is sometimes when we're busy, especially when I'm busy, I can just forget the value that you and the team have, and the time pressure's there. So, you know, please make sure you remind me. And, you know, you do have a valuable input to give. So I'll remember to listen better next time and pay attention. And please just give me a nudge if I'm not doing it properly, Jerry.
Great. Okay. No, thanks for that. Appreciate it.
So a bit of a difference for take two, much more confident body language. It didn't start with I don't want to bother you. It was have you got a few minutes? I've got something I need to feed back. Clearly calling out the behaviour using language that isn't personal. It's not accusational, accusing Anita of anything, but calling out the behaviour which is causing a problem. Key thing here is re-emphasising the common goal is that there is a common purpose of having a successful project. Anita could respond constructively because she had something to respond to, and Jerry suggesting solutions. It kind of avoided that risk is that you take the problem, you just throw it to the other person to solve. But actually, Jerry was also suggesting solutions as part of the I need in order to be able to avoid that situation going forward, and really shows initiative. The key thing here is that you can spot the elements of often, but Jerry's not using often as a script, but you can pick out the elements. So the elements of often are a way of really clearly articulating the situation and making sure the emotion isn't driving it. It's driven by facts and feelings and openness from Jerry, and he's making the conversation his own. It's his own language. So we're emotionally driven humans, and we'll always need to have difficult conversations from time to time. One of the key things that teams and organizations can do is to create a feedback culture. So creating that in teams helps people confidently have these difficult conversations. The thing with this is that there's some simple tools and techniques you can do, but it's all about practice. The more you practice, the less difficult a conversation comes. It's like anything that we do. Initially, it feels a bit clunky and it feels a bit unnatural and awkward. But actually, the more you do it, the easier and the more natural it feels. So we'll just take a look now at 4 things you can do to create this. I mean, it's starting with yourselves in any conversation. In the conversation, the next conversation you have when you leave the webinar today is you can start to try these things out because they apply to any conversation. So the first thing is active listening. Consideration of verbal and non-verbal communication, the power of the pause, and powerful questions. So Otto Scharmer described 4 levels of listening in his book Theory U. So the first level of listening is how many of us have been on a video call and the person that you're having a call with is staring out of the window, checking their phone for other emails and checking their WhatsApp groups, or responding to emails because we can hear them typing on the keyboard. If that's not the other person, then is that you? How actively engaged are you with the other person who's speaking? And if we're working at level 1, then to be honest, we're not listening. Level 2, and this is where I can think of lots and lots of situations where I've been like this, is that you're only listening for the ammunition ready for your retaliation and you're preparing your defense. So you're only listening to the other person to pick out the things which you can immediately challenge and go back on. And really all you're doing is you're waiting for them to pause so you can leap in. So level 2 is you're being really selective about what you're actually listening for, but it's all about you and making sure you're prepared to then have your say. Level 3 is where we're now actively listening. So if you're having a performance review with somebody, if you're having a project update or project review, if you're analyzing some data, then active listening is that you're checking the details. If the person's saying everything's on track, you're also checking the body language and making sure the body language matches the words coming out of their mouth and the data at hand. And really you're assuring yourself that, so through active listening, you're assuring yourself that the important information is getting analysed and discussed. And then level 4 is where we are empathetic listening. So level 4 is a much deeper level, much more about being completely present with the other person to the exclusion of everything else. So it's all about them. So it's a next level of depth from active listening, and this is really where effective coaching happens. So professional coaches operate at this level. If you've got exec coaches, if you're having coaching conversations with your colleagues or your staff or with your boss, then the empathetic is where you should be operating. So the last poll today is being honest. If you think generally around the conversations that you're having with other people, what level of listening are you normally operating at? Bear with me, here we are, and off we go. So I said, be honest. And almost there. Give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we'll share the results. Okay, excellent, brilliant. So we've got no pretends. Very good. It'll be interesting if that would be right of other people that you're on calls with, but generally that it's really good not to see that. And it's not unusual that empathetic's actually quite low, only 11%, because that's much more, you know, it's focused, it's coaching conversations rather than just you know, our normal day-to-day. So the results active at 49% and selective at 40%. So still quite a lot of the selective of just checking what the other person is saying to you and picking out the bits that you're kind of filtering, but lots of active listening happening there, which is superb. Okay. So generally, I'd say, based on the audience today, kind of working between levels 2 and 3. Working at level 2 is not unusual. Having a feedback culture is really being described as, you know, you've got active listening being used in every conversation. Just a little bit about verbal and non-verbal communication. If we looked at how we communicate as being composed of 3 elements, so we've got the words that we use. So do we use jargon? Do we use complicated words? What kind of terminology? What kind of slang? It's important to choose the right words. What's our voice modulation like? Pauses, speed, enthusiasm, the tone of our words are really important. And the third element is our body language. So arms moving, eye contact, facial expressions, posture, appearance. I want to focus here on the congruence. So the key element of being confident to have these difficult conversations, these courageous conversations, is ensuring there is congruence between the 3 elements. And it's especially important for courageous conversations. So remember, the other person has a ladder of inference. If they are getting that actually the words are not matching up with the body language, not matching up with the tone, that it starts to put into their heads is that actually the data they're listening to might not be the right kind of information, and they'll create their own story from it. So the clearer you can communicate, then the less the story the other person is actually building from that, it's going to be more accurate. So reflect on a conversation where the other person's body language and tone haven't matched. So if somebody tells you that you're doing a great job, but at the same time they're checking their emails, they're staring out the window, or the other person says that you're having a discussion with them, they say yes, they're fully committed to delivering the report on that date, but the tone of voice and the body language is suggesting otherwise, how confident are you that they're telling the truth, that they are actually going to do their best, that they're going to deliver on their commitments? You're not. So it's really important is that it's really, really easy to spot this in other people, but very difficult to spot it in yourself. So having self-awareness around reflecting on some conversation that maybe haven't gone so well, how congruent were your words, your tone, and your body language? And maybe you've given some people, you've miscommunicated, or you've given people some information which they've then made some false assumptions on the back of that. So authenticity is really important. Think about if we need to have that conversation in a virtual setting. So this is all well and good if you're sat opposite them in the coffee shop or in the meeting room, but we're now very much a virtual working kind of society. So we need to work a bit harder to ensure we clearly communicate our message. There's more emphasis on the words and the tone, and we might be missing some of the body language. So in this webinar today, is that you can see my shoulders, but you can't see anything that's going on. You can't see if my foot's tapping or I tap my fingers. You know, there's lots of information from the body language which is missing from the virtual world, which means that there's less data being communicated, which means the other person there's more spaces for them to fill in the blanks with their own story. So for difficult conversations, what we'd recommend is a video call is a lot better than a phone call, which is a lot better than an email. So video call, words, tone, and you've got a decent amount of body language. Phone call, you've only got words and tone, and an email, you've only got words. So the more information you can give, the better. Therefore, just consider that in terms of your planning for your difficult conversation. The power of the pause, it's important to calm the brain. So referring back to the SCARF model, which I described earlier, is that when that situation arises, is not to immediately react, but to take a pause and a step back. Don't just react. And how can you actively listen if you're always talking? So there's the old adage of we were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, is that you should use them in that ratio. So it's really important that once you've shared your feedback using the often approach, is that you sit back and let the other person reflect and respond. Don't feel the need. It feels really uncomfortable until you get used to it, but let them fill the space. Don't urge to fill the space yourself. And language, finally language. So Rudyard Kipling quote here, I keep 6 honest men, they taught me all I knew. Their names are what, why, when, how, where, and who. So words are the really important in helping us check our story and engage the other person. And choosing the right words can elicit important information. Because what we're doing is we're testing the other person's ladder of inference and their assumptions and their view of the world, and against the view of the world that we have, and just see if it is actually the truth or we've made a lot of stuff up. So in terms of the 6 wise men, then the more powerful the question is towards the top of the triangle. So if we are just asking which and yes or no questions, you get very little information back. You're narrowing down the level of information. As we move into who, when, and where, then we're eliciting more important information and wider information from the other person. And how, what, and why are deemed to be the most powerful types of questions, because they'll elicit the most information. They're enabling, what you're doing is you're enabling the other person to open up and share their feelings, what they're seeing, and options for next steps for your solution. As a word of warning, there's a caution on why. So remember, if we're communicating with our 3 elements of words, tone, and body language, if our words, tone, and body language are a little bit assertive and aggressive, then using why questions come across as being really aggressive and accusational. So using why questions, you've got to be really careful to make sure your communication is congruent and it's not overly assertive. Think also about your conflict, your preferred conflict style. If your preferred conflict style is more of an assertive, aggressive type style, using why questions are going to come across as assertive and aggressive. And the other person may perceive that as a threat. Remember, SCARF model. So the other person seeing that as a threat, they're more likely to move away from that. You're less likely to get a positive outcome to that conversation. So in summary, we shouldn't be afraid of conflict. So conflict's got the negative connotations. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We should embrace it as it creates huge value, and reduce our stress levels and ensures that we actually enjoy what we're doing. Developing this feedback culture is really important to help build the confidence. The feedback culture is you've got constant practice through that, and practice makes perfect. So having a feedback culture means you're always practicing these things, so it becomes less awkward, less unnatural. And using a framework can help you take the emotion out. These difficult conversations, it's because there's something at risk for you. They're really important. Having a framework and a process just helps you take what's in your head, put it down on paper, and then help you plan and keep your emotions in check. Make sure emotions aren't running that conversation. So thanks for your time today. Here's the references that I mentioned. There is actually a free conflict styles assessment on the web as well, which is good. It uses slightly different dimensions, but they map directly to the ThomasKilmann model. So there's a little free assessment in there as well if you've got the slides afterwards. And with that, I shall hand over to Holly and see, have we got any questions, Holly?
We do, Mark. Thank you so much for that. Really interesting. And I know usually that you've got a partner in crime and you've been alone today. I think you did a fantastic job. So we've got 7 questions in at the moment. We are a little bit pressed for time, but we'll move through based on the priority order of how they've been voted. If anyone does have any additional questions, they can add them still. So our top question is, how can I have difficult conversations when I'm working remotely?
So that was so the last bit of the webinar today talked about video comment. So you got the 3 elements of a conversation. So it's important to be congruent in all 3 elements of tone, words, tone, and behavior and body language. In a virtual environment, recommendation would be video conferencing is your minimum. If you can get in a room, great, but virtual means you're not in the room. So just being opposite the other person on a video conference. So don't do it by telephone. And definitely don't do it by email.
Great. So our second question, do you have any techniques when communication by email is the only option on how to chase progress when you're having no response?
You should always push if it's becoming a real problem and there is a risk to you of something not being delivered, then really you need a face-to-face. You can't do this you can use email to coordinate a meeting, but there is a need to actually talk to that person. But by email, all the other person is getting are words, and they'll create their own story from that. And imagine it might be that your emails are ended up in their spam. They may not have received them. You think they should have received them, but actually, how do you know that that's your ladder? So you need to find a way to talk to them.
Yeah. Okay. I think that one for me as well. I just say sometimes is there a phone number? Is there another contact within that department? What if they've left or they're on holiday and they've not gotten out of office, and kind of exploring what other avenues might be impacting the situation. That's
great, Bill. Yeah, find out who else do they work with that you can talk to. Yeah.
Yeah. Next one, you use the word conflict and not disagreement. Why use the word conflict when it evokes negative feelings?
Well, because it's not necessarily always a disagreement. It might just be a differing experiences. So it's not that you don't disagree, it's just you got different views. So those different views are defined by a conflict as a different view on a particular situation. So that a disagreement may be in there, but actually it's not just disagreements. And I think it's all about that myth busting of conflict always being negative as well. It's kind of getting over it and just saying actually conflict it's just two people have a difference of opinion. It doesn't mean they disagree with each other, but it's how entrenched they are with their own opinion, and then how can you kind of break through that?
Yeah, great. So this one's got 7 votes. How can I confidently give feedback to my boss that he should give me more autonomy when he's much more senior and doesn't ask for feedback?
So the thing about just because they don't ask for feedback doesn't mean you shouldn't give feedback. So a feedback culture starts with you. If it's something that's important to you, is that you should be proactive. The key thing with it is that really make sure you understand what you mean by autonomy. So in terms of the often model is that it's relaying back to your boss is what impact their behavior is having on your level of autonomy and what impact that's having on you as a person and being able to perform. So as we saw through these scenarios today, it's really having that conversation of, you're not there, I want to give you some feedback, but it's, I've got something I want to share with you, which I think you can help with. But then identifying the behavior, i.e. the data, which is having an impact on you, then utilizing the framework to have that conversation. So don't wait to be asked for feedback. You should proactively give feedback. Feedback's a gift.
Feedback's a gift. So this question probably builds on that, but this person's got a little bit more control in that they're saying they'd love to know the best way to build a culture of feedback within their own team.
So that would be, so if we take those 4 steps of actively listening to each other, the giving feedback, giving constructive, say, developmental feedback, always asking for feedback and receiving it, always willing to give it and receive it, all those little things. So if you're actually within a team, even after a meeting, it's just a case of flagging up, this is our ways of working, this is how we're going to work going forwards, and actually being able to recognize afterwards that went really well, keep doing that, or actually when you did such and such, that had the impact of. Actually within a team, I wouldn't say it's easy, but you're more in control of being able to create that feedback, and it starts with the leader. Remember, going through the often model and reflecting on the ladder of inferences, you're actually sharing your feelings. You're being very open and honest about the impact of that on you as an individual. And that really engages other people that you work with. And by role modeling that, you encourage other people to then do the same.
Yeah, great, thank you. Just 2 more. So how important is it to avoid conflict with the person who is your boss or employer? At times, I'm often afraid to raise an issue.
So the question would be, is that what's at risk? So if we reflect on with, I've talked about the SCARF model today, is that what is it that you've got the fear? What could possibly go wrong? If you raise these, what's the worst that can happen? Quite often, if you think about what's the worst that could happen, the answer is nothing. And if you go into one of these conversations, I think, hand on heart, every single difficult conversation I've gone into, it's not gone as bad as I expected. I built this story that it was going to be an absolute nightmare and destroy the relationship and I'll get fired. It never works out like that, because of the way that you approach the conversation. Is you're actually taking all the emotion out of it. You're not being accusational. It's not about the other person. It's actually you're just sharing your feelings. And usually things go a lot better. You may not get perfect. You can't control the outcome, but you can control how you approach that conversation.
I think this last question
did I answer that question?
Yeah, no, I think so. And the last question probably links in, because that's saying, how can we communicate in a way where we're kind of aiming toward the reward brain rather than the threat brain that you spoke about? That if we're in that situation, that's not where we want to be. It's where we were dodging cyclists. It's not how we want to be when we're in a conversation with our colleagues.
So with that one, it's that. So looking at, if you're giving feedback and somebody's not done something, it's giving sufficient information for them to see how they could be doing better. So it's kind of doing the flip side, create clarity. So go from being ambiguous and unclear to creating clarity, moves people towards that. So through your communication, just bear in mind the dimensions of SCARF and ensure and then enhance those to enable the other person to see it as, this is something positive to move to rather than this is something negative to go away from. So it's around how you position that against the levers.
Excellent. So that brings us to the end of the Q&A. Thank you again, Mark, so much. A really thought-provoking session, and I'm hoping that everyone that's watched the webinar feels that they're able to apply some of that learning into their own experiences and contexts and can go forward and be courageous in their conversations. If you have enjoyed this webinar, you can find all of our past webinars on the NIHR TV YouTube channel under the Development and Support webinar playlists. Thank you, all of you, for your time, Mark, again, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.